right, we are at 1:02, so we'll go ahead and get started. It is with great pleasure that I would like to introduce Sharon Terry. I think most of you on the call probably know who Sharon is as the founder and executive director of the Genetic Alliance. Sharon doesn't know this, but when I started our foundation, I was speaking to one of our board members. I'll throw him under the bus, Bruce Korf, and he said, if you want to find out exactly what you need to do and what path you need to go on, you need to call Sharon Terry. So with that, Sharon, welcome. We are so glad to have you today.
Great. Thanks very much for the introduction. And I'm delighted to see so many of my friends here. I figured I would, and it really is great to be with you all. I was in 2003 part of the founding of this network, and wanted to certainly come back and see all of you. Genetic Alliance was one of the kind of umbrella groups that helped the early groups get started. So I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour of Genetic Alliance today. Lots of you know lots of parts of this. I will touch on some new pieces, and all of this is the tip of the iceberg. So every single slide here could have 40 slides under it because every one of these things is a big program. But again, I'm just going to give you a whirlwind tour, and you can click into, so to speak, anything you want to. And the PDF of this presentation will be available to you after. So I think almost all of you know that I'm here because my two kids were diagnosed in 1994 with pseudoxanthoma elasticum, a rare disease. And like all of you who come from families with rare diseases, this was a complete shock. It was a stepping over a line to become part of a club I never wanted to be part of. I remember maybe 10 years ago being at a meeting where Eric Lander was saying, I'm an advocate just like Sharon Terry is, and I'm a patient just like she is. And I stood up and said, I don't want to be here. I never wanted to be here, and I don't want to be here in the future. So I think that distinguishes a lot of the advocates. This isn't my career. It's not what I chose, but it certainly is my mission and a privilege to be in this. And again, lots of you know this, but it's important for the reason that I come to this table, and that is when my kids were diagnosed, I realized very quickly there wasn't much known about the condition. And like all of you, kind of took the bull by the horns. This was 1995, pre any kind of real internet. There was that DOSI thing. And I created a biobank, a registry, borrowed lab space, found the gene, created a clinical trial that tested the test, and have gone into clinical trials since then. I'm a PI on all of the clinical trials in PXE, and I'm the coordinator of the research consortium for it. Along the way, I learned that I had to speak research, even though I have a master's in religious studies. And so I started to publish papers and begin to start to articulate some of the things that I thought should be done for all diseases. I'm happy to say Elizabeth and Ian have their disease advances in them for sure. They are 34 and 32 right now, and they're both working in the health field. Elizabeth at Deloitte, with 400 people under her reconfiguring the Veterans Administration HR, and Ian at Luna DNA and PXE International recreating how people actually do research with one another. I have a TED Talk that explains some of the reasons why I thought we need to take the bull by the horns. So the dawn of this age of people-driven research is something that I have been writing about for a very long time, and finally, these words are at least in common parlance. People are starting to pay attention to concepts that we promoted, again, 20, 25 years ago, and in some cases are going beyond the lip service that lots of us have seen given to these kinds of words. I realized pretty quickly, probably 1998, so the kids are diagnosed in 94, that what could be done for one disease could be done for all. And part of that was vision given to me by the many families who showed up on my couch in Sharon, Massachusetts, asking, can you build us a biobank? Can you build us a registry? Again, those were things no layperson had ever done. And in fact, there were some organizations that threw me out of the room for even thinking that we advocates should be so involved in research. I joined with Genetic Alliance, which was already 10 years old in 1996, and began to work with Genetic Alliance, taking the CEOship and presidency around the year 2000. And we are a network of about 10,000 organizations focused on people, and they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, from individuals, families, and communities. And while we use the words people-centric in the year 2000, they are now finally words that people understand, and I hope are beginning to be part of the conversation. Genetic Alliance, as I said, was founded in '86 by Joan Weist and Victor McCusick. Joan thought that Victor asked her to set up a gerontology alliance. And so she said, yes, she was a social worker. She didn't know that Victor was the granddaddy of human genetics and that she was going to be in for a ride. And she did a great job. She still comes around. I visit her. She talks to us. She's in her 90s. And our initial funding, in fact, we were founded by Abby Myers and some folks at the Genetic Services branch of the Maternal and Child Health Bureau at HRSA, and we still have funding from them. And then there's a list of some of our other funders. Right away, I said, we are not patients in this equation. We are, in fact, going to actually change the language, and we're also not patient. And so this view of us as individuals who might have enormous information asymmetry with the rest of the community is one that I deplore, and believe that it really is about people, it's about communities, and that the more we can come from this grassroots level, grass tops level, the better we will be. And we've seen that in every other industry. It's still, I've been saying this for 25 years, but it is still really hard in health and biomedical research to get there. Genetic Alliance has been about activating communities to meaningfully participate and engage in policy, services, and research. And as I said, I'll just give you a kind of whirlwind view of this. This is carved in the Senate. Laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of humankind by Thomas Jefferson. And one piece of our policy work has been to pass the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act in 2008 after 12 years of visiting every office on the Hill over and over. And you can see some people here that you might recognize, some of who are now deceased, in fact, but who were key in that work. And I show this just to say, we are involved in a whole host of advocacy around various legislation. All of you who are on the community forum constantly get requests from me to sign various things to bring to Congress. And right now there are bills on clinical whole genome sequencing for Medicaid babies in the NICU and PICU. There are bills on getting genetic counselors licensed and certified in various states and nationally as well. And then certainly things like Cures 2.0. This bill was especially important because it brought together a coalition of about 500 organizations, and those organizations still work together off and on in a variety of ways. And lots of you were involved in that, and I have great appreciation for what happened then. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but Genetic Alliance has also been key participant in what is now being called people-centered research. And again, I think we actually instigated a lot of this years ago. We were the engagement leg of the three-legged stool with Harvard and Duke for PCORNet, and we developed some pretty significant tools around how do we as individuals, people, families get involved in research, and how do communities, as I said in the title of this talk, own the table. I do not want to be invited to the table, get a seat at the table. I want to build the table. I want to decide the meal. I want to decide who's coming to the dinner. I want to be involved. And this for me is not an ego play. It really is a play of saying, here we are actually the focus of these research endeavors. We are actually the center of this universe, and we need to be in the driver's seat for it. I'm not going to go again into this, and I'm going to say that over and over because there's way too much here. But this is an engagement assessment tool that we worked on over the 5 years in PCORNet and was ratified by all 180 institutions. Essentially a checklist that's very practical about, are you really involving people in research? Do you really know what it means to say people-centered? And so this checklist is available on our website. We also have modules and trainings that go with the various parts to work with both the research and the advocacy community. Okay, so some of our tools and resources for organizations and for communities, there are a whole host of them. The one of these that I'm not going to say much about here, but that you certainly can go and check out is this big complicated map. It's called NETS, which is Navigating the Ecosystem of Translational Science. Every one of these words or blocks or neighborhoods have clickable information. When I started to work on PXE, looking at how do I find the gene and then where the heck do I go from here, I had to learn all these steps and learn that they were not linear, like those lovely Chevron pipelines we see about intervention or therapy development. And instead, I built this map. A couple of years after I built it and published it in Science Translational Medicine, NCATS and the National Academies took it up and refined it, albeit quite slightly, and published several papers on it as well, because they thought, I built it for advocacy groups. They thought it would be really good for everybody in the community to be looking at it. Okay, so we kind of start at the beginning and go to the end in terms of very simple and then complex kinds of solutions. This is an advocacy atlas, intentionally looks like a Candyland map, not at all to diminish the incredible suffering and difficulty families face when they receive a diagnosis. But essentially, with the funding from HRSA, we're able to put together resources. This is undergoing a major renovation now at Genetic Alliance and will be hosted actually in a separate website even because the tools around it are too complicated to keep in one place. We give support to families, give resources to families and so on in any of these clickable blocks. Another major endeavor of ours was wiki advocacy. So Joan Weiss had written a book called Starting and Sustaining a Support Group. And the book was fabulous. I read it in 1994. She wrote it in 1987. It's still a wonderful book. In fact, Genetic Alliance has recently shut our office after being out of it for 2 years in Washington, D.C. And I've moved myself to San Diego to be closer to my granddaughter. And I brought several copies of Joan's book here with me. We took the book, though, and actually then renovated, renewed it, revised it, and created something called Wiki Advocacy, which has 2,000 pages of how to run an advocacy group. What about all the different aspects? Everything from what kind of merchant account do you want? What about childcare at a conference and registries and biobanks and so on? And this is actually maintained by the community for the most part. And that is that as things get posted to community forum or are written elsewhere, people, regular old folks in the community come here and add and update this resource. We're a strong believer in both long tail and crowdsourcing, and put together, there's nothing like it for keeping the rare disease community alive and well. Another resource we have is Disease Info Search. And Joan created this as a physical publication in 1986, a directory of the advocacy groups, and called it the Directory of Advocacy Groups. And it was used largely by genetic counselors who needed to give their clients, their patients, some information. We, in 1999, I coded it in HTML in its first online form. And since then, it's undergone many revisions, as you can see by it looking quite nice here. And it's undergoing another one right now. So in this directory, there are 10,000 diseases and their subtypes. Again, long tail, but also crowdsourced. So the descriptions that are written here are written by the advocacy group. So each of you go and log in. There's this little register or sign up here. You're all probably already in there. Log in and work on your entry. We have lots and lots of granular information on every one of you in the sense that you've entered it. And so certainly simple things like what you offer in terms of support of a support group, but also things like, do you have a registry? Do you have a biobank? Do you have a mouse model, an assay, a biomarker, and so on? And how are you participating in clinical trials? So all that is here. Disease Info Search actually connects to PubMed. So every time anyone searches on a disease in PubMed, it links out to Disease Info Search for every single disease. And so it's a great way to get a lot of traffic to your organization from something like PubMed. There are, again, more than 10,000 groups, and I'm not going to go through all this information, but essentially to say the connections that are made through this resource are phenomenal. If you've ever been to Global Genes List, it is Disease Info Search with a different skin on it. We do API it out to lots of other entities, and you'll notice that we hardly brand it when we do that, because again, I've always been interested in not promoting Genetic Alliance or any organization for that matter, except for getting the mission done. And so you won't find our brand all over it. There are lots and lots of visitors in lots and lots of ways coming from a variety of sources. We've also acquired this past year in 2021 something called ClinWiki. It was a separate organization. Its mission is to take the big bolus of clinical trials in clinicaltrials.gov and to allow communities to curate those. And so you all know that if someone searches your condition, they're going to come up with 150 clinical trials just because someone dropped your disease name into that clinical trials description. And this instead is a curation by you, for you, about you, for you to point your members, your patients in this direction. And then you're the first to see this new tool, GaugeRx. GaugeRx takes the data from disease info search and sorts it in a certain way. The reason for GaugeRx is that pharma companies, biotech companies, academic researchers call me 10 times a day, send me 100 emails a day, asking me, what's a good community with a great leader who's easy to work with, where the disease is ready for research and there's clinical endpoints that have been defined, for example. That's an example. And I, out of my head, remember what I can remember, which is getting worse and worse since I turned 65 this past year. And so instead, this tool will actually just draw the fields out of disease info search. And we have a prototype here that has been built and we're now in development for. And the tool will allow researchers, you, whomever, to come here and decide how important is, for example, biology to me, or translational research, or clinical information, or market opportunity. And the numbers here, 0 to 7, 0 to 9, are just whether or not you filled out the field. That's all. So groups that have filled out the fields get high scores. Groups that have not don't. Simply put, eventually we have built an algorithm eventually we'll use to also help to say, here's a level of maturity around the science, or a level of maturity around the market opportunity because of how well this group is organized and how collaborative the leadership is and so forth, all of which you've entered. So we're not making any determinations except to present this data for the now 2,000 disease groups that are in disease info search. So this will save us a lot of time. It will be more objective. It will be more for you to just make sure you're known in this tool, and pharma and academia can look at it. I'm going to shift now to Peer, which is powered by Luna DNA, and talk about that. Peer is our promise for engaging everyone responsibly, our registry platform. Lots of times it's been said to us, advocacy organizations and rare disease individuals, that it's like looking for a needle in a haystack to find you. And often CROs and others will be looking in clinics and asking clinicians to connect. And we know very well that the haystack is made of needles, especially if you come to us. Our entire haystack is made of that needle that somebody wants. And so I actually wrote a paper with that name about 20 years ago and have been working for quite a long time on registries, as most of you know. Sorry, I moved my mouse. So in principle, it's a good question to ask, why do we run a registry? And long ago, that wasn't a question because there were no lay-led registries. So that was a pretty simple thing. There was a huge demand to replicate what I had done in 1995 for PXE International. We believed from the beginning that the communities, you guys, are the best representatives of their members' needs. These are all things now that everybody thinks are like motherhood and apple pie. They were hard to get anybody to believe 20 years ago. This particular system that we've built is collaborative so that we're all learning from each other. It's built in high quality data standards. It's consortium based and governed by a consortium of advocacy organizations. New business models are constantly emerging here, and I'll talk about a couple of those. And then the world has become very interesting with GDPR and CCPA and so on. And so we advocacy groups used to be the data controllers, and now with so many laws around the world, it's better for our registry actually to take that on. So we also thought, and this is again thinking from 20 years ago when we were starting this, 25 years ago, that we have too much in common, we advocacy organizations and rare diseases, and that registry should be cross-condition. This mechanism should be easy like other solutions. So you all who are older can remember trying to put something on your website to take a credit card. Very difficult. Now you put a PayPal button, and that's exactly the kind of thing that we've done here with this registry so that we could actually move more quickly into getting the work done. So in 2003, we moved from the PXE model into a biobank, a registry, an IRB with a very simple system built on FileMaker Pro, very sophisticated, but very simple. In 2008, we moved everything to REDCap, and we saw too many limitations in REDCap being investigator-centered. And in 2013, we won a Sanofi prize in a cool Shark Tank style competition where I had to defend myself against 400 competitors, and we won $300,000 to actually partner with a company called Private Access. And we created a bespoke solution, 400,000 lines of code that we maintained until 2019 when we met and worked with Luna PBC, which is a public benefit corp that runs Luna DNA, which is a technology platform that is owned by the data sharers. So Luna PBC does not own Luna DNA, the people who share the data do. And so using Luna DNA, Genetic Alliance finally has the tool we need to promote people from subjects of research to partners in discovery to transform research. And as I said, this world has become really intricate and complex, especially globally and inter-country. And so Luna has a data privacy division that takes care of the laws in all the places, including a whole bunch of the states now that are passing their own laws. And you've probably seen there's some lawsuits going on of Ancestry.com and how they handle data and so on. None of us want to be data controllers anymore. And so we are really happy to have Luna take on all of that. This is all stuff that will be easy for you to understand, you know, that people, that communities really are the source of truth and that we are the central unit or element in this process. We validate group experience and phenotypes through the work that we do. And Luna's been able to do this at a phenomenal rate using, in fact, even some tools that my own son, which I'm very proud of, has invented and applied for patents for that allow community-driven innovation to build on things like social computational science and ethnology and incorporating the equivalent of the Delphi process, except with less bias, in processes that take only 3 weeks instead of years. And that's really been phenomenal. And then looking at how do we actually integrate with an industry, and by that I mean actually companies as well as academias, that's the industry that need what we have, that want this to be longitudinal and multimodal and so on, that must have this global consumer privacy view, and then also are very frustrated with fragmented sets. And so this partnership between Genetic Alliance and Luna allows this to happen, and it is really exciting and interesting and simple way. I'll say one more thing here because I didn't put in a whole bunch of slides around what it looks like. We integrate with 700,000 electronic health records in the United States. That's just about all of them. There's about 3% that we don't, and we do once we see them, we're able to do that as well. And then also Luna folks came out of Illumina, and they are really good at integrating genomic data. And so everything up to CRAM, BAMs, GVCF files and so forth are all able to be stored there. And then we have a library of every validated instrument we've been able to find, and you can build surveys in the survey builder on the fly quite easily. And I'm going to talk about our IRB, and because we own our own IRB, the platform is IRB approved. So literally, if you told me today you want to get up and running, we need your logo, we need the tagline, and you're done, probably 15 minutes. If you already have a registry, the platform is being used for a lot of studies, natural history studies, biomarker studies, phase 1 and 2 clinical trials. We interface with a lot of CROs to make sure that the eCRF moving from the workbench in the system to the regulatory agency, EMA or FDA, is well done. I'll talk a little bit about our boot camp. So our boot camp, we built because we saw that communities needed support. Our first boot camp was 1999, and we've improved it since then. At least we think that putting these 25 years of experience together, and we created a website and a course. Our course was sporadic in the old days. Now it's 2-3 times a year, and we do some actually for coalitions of diseases, for groups that come together and want to have this at once. And it's a deep dive into the world of registry. So all the stuff we've collected over these 25 years about community engagement, data collection standards, and so forth and so on. This balances the importance of planning ahead with the ever-changing needs of a community. And as I said, you can have your registry up in 15 minutes, and then you can figure out, how do I really want to use this as an engagement tool? Because I think ultimately that's what it needs to be. And we're platform agnostic in our boot camp. We also have a biobank. The Genetic Alliance Biobank has also been around a long time, and this is a service where we provide organizations with a place to store every single biological sample type you can possibly imagine. Interesting that bullet went to the top. It was established in 2003, built on my having ovaries in the freezer next to the ice cream in 1995. We quickly upgraded to a professional biobank for PXE, and then again, lots of disease groups wanted to know, how do I do that? How do I own my own samples so that I can call the shots? In my TED Talk, I said, we can herd cats being the research community, if we move the food. The food is biological samples and data. We also organize services that can be performed on the sample. So simple things, obviously, like DNA extraction, kitting services, distribution, phlebotomists, all that sort of stuff we take care of. And we work with vendors to do that. You'll notice that all through this, Genetic Alliance always partners with a vendor when we cannot have to build something and instead just be the kind of the network that knits this stuff together. And it's very affordable. When we first did it, there were a whole bunch of advocacy groups. We did it together, and it cost us like $25,000 a year. And now I think it's down to $750 a quarter. So it's very, very affordable. We have our own IRB, and that was important because there weren't a lot of IRBs in the early years understanding people-centric projects. And I would say that's still true. And so since 2022 started, we've reviewed almost 60 submissions already this year. We have about 100 active protocols, 300 completed ones. We're constantly adding new requests, and we do them not just for advocacy groups, but ACMG, NSGC, certain academic groups that are working in SMART IRB, which is a kind of collective that NIH created and Genetic Alliance prototyped with them to allow reliance on our IRB and others. And this is substantially less expensive in almost any circumstance. Yeah, I mean, if you, for example, come on Peer and are using our IRB, it's $500 for the initial review and $150 for any, not revisions, because those are free that in the system because the system's covered. But if you were going to, I don't know, add a blood collection, add a biomarker study, those are substantially less. And it takes about 24 to 48 hours for a review, and we have someone on staff who helps you to write that application. We have another division of Genetic Alliance called Expecting Health. Some of you have interacted with Natasha Bonhomme, who runs this division. Natasha came to us when she was 22 and has done a phenomenal job at building a whole enterprise that ran Baby's First Test, which is the clearinghouse of newborn screening in the nation, and now is working in a whole host of ways around a number of projects in the newborn, prenatal, postnatal, maternal, and child health arena. And her website is gorgeous, and you can visit it for more information. Another new offering is awareness practice for individuals, families, and communities. We offer 2-hour to 15-hour workshops, obviously not contiguous or ongoing practices. What we've discovered, and I've discovered this myself over the last maybe 5-7 years, is that there's a lot of residual trauma and shock in our tissue. And there's a lot of research that's been done on this finally, things like body-based kinds of therapies and so forth. And we're not offering therapy, but we are offering a space to be with the shock of a diagnosis, even if it was decades ago, the burnout and fatigue that those of us who are in this constant uphill battle face, organizational challenges, whether those are personal in the sense of my organization or institutional in my trying to work in a whole host of communities, or just resting. So many times people come to these workshops and say, I just need a pause. I need a break. I need a rest. And so we offer that as well. And then finding support. And all of these things, not like a retreat in the sense of, well, that was nice and now I go back to my life, but integrating these practical tools to use in everyday life, including even I offer every single Monday night, once you've gone through one of these, a time to just take a break for an hour. I love this quote by Mary Oliver, and it's part of why I personally do this, is tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And I think lots of us have chosen something quite incredible, and it takes its toll. It has its costs, and Genetic Alliance decided to add this to our suite of offerings so that we, in fact, are able to support you in a way that I've felt very supported for, again, the last 5 to 7 years. The last thing I'll talk about is iHope, which is a new program of Genetic Alliance. Some of you might have heard about it, and I'll give you a quick whirlwind tour of it. The vision of iHope is that every individual receive a diagnosis, is connected to appropriate care and research, and controls their own genomic and health data. You can see the vision grows straight out of Genetic Alliance, which is really a wonderful thing to see come to fruition. And this, regardless of race, ethnicity, or geographic location. These are things you know. I put them in here still because I thought you should see what I'm saying to the rest of the world as I walk around now talking about this, that genetic disease affects about 250. I know we sometimes say 300 or 350. I decided to be conservative so no one will argue with me. And 7,000 genetic disorders. Again, sometimes it says 6, sometimes it says 10. And years for diagnosis, sure, 5, 7, 9. We've all seen all the different studies. Or infinity. Some people are never diagnosed, and particularly in low to middle income countries where we'll be working a lot with this. This next slide is because we're working in low to middle income countries. Lots of times where people say to us, well, but malaria and HIV are extremely important conditions, and they are. But we have 212 cases of malaria a year, 40 million cases of HIV, and 250 people living with genetic diseases. And so it is a really important problem. And we all know that here, but lots of times I have to make that clear. In addition, it is projected that sometime during this decade, the most common cause of death in Africa for children will be genetic diseases, not infectious disease, because Gates and others have done such a great job with things like malaria and HIV. I'm sure all of you saw this. Bravo. We finally have an official report that genetic diagnosis is a good thing and that we need to get it done as quickly as possible. This is from the United States Government Accountability Office in October. It didn't get a lot of play, I think, probably because we're in a year of COVID and inflation and all kinds of other things. Every one of these gray boxes are things that you all could talk about and know about, and we need action on. And so I hope we'll put people on this pink path in the middle. This builds on a program that Illumina has already done. They've actually sequenced 1,100 families. That means 1,100 kids or adults and their parents. So really more like 3,000 genomes. In those individuals who are undiagnosed, they are sick and they're undiagnosed, 68% received clinically relevant variants, and 60% had a change in management. And 5 new genetic disorders resulted from these 24 active clinical sites around the world in this pilot project of Illumina. I won't go through this slide, but essentially some of the naysayers said, well, you can do that in high income countries. You can't in low to middle income countries. And in fact, they did. They went out to Peru, to Ghana, to DR Congo, and did the same thing. And you can see that, in fact, there's even greater yield in some of the low to middle income countries than high income countries. And essentially here, what we're saying is that what we've done in developed nations like the US, like Europe, can be done elsewhere around the world. And in fact, we probably can skip some of the analog type mistakes we made and move straight to a digital world. I have a couple of stories in here. I'm not going to go through them because you all know stories of a kid or an adult who had no diagnosis and then had a diagnosis and a treatment and has now a new lease on life. I'll say just a little bit about this one. I'm actually working with this mom and her daughter. The daughter and mom suffered greatly for many, many years. The daughter both had lost their vision. A off-the-shelf chemotherapeutic was administered to them last year, and within about 3 or 4 weeks, the daughter could see again. And this painting on the right was given to Ryan Taft, who was the geneticist who diagnosed them. And so these stories, and they have hundreds and thousands of them, underpin the work that we're going to do. We're going to scale to 40,000 patients per year. That'll be 120,000 genomes a year. The reason that we can do this is because Illumina has given us $120 million in reagents and in machines. And that's allowing us to be able to run this program. We have also received on this IT support side, and it's not public yet, but it should be in the next week or so. Amazon Web Services will donate all of the storage we need, because this is an enormous amount of storage to have 120,000 genomes, BAM files, CRAM files coming in a year. The model is that I hope Genetic Health will partner with laboratories that are capable of clinical whole genome sequencing. That's not a lot of labs in the world right now, but we in fact will do that with labs that have clinical sites they're working with, where either they're low to middle income households in the US or low to middle income countries. Those patients and families will be served by this system. When the data comes back and the interpretation comes back, that will all be deposited in Luna. And so again, people will have control of that data. They'll be able to make decisions about what gets done with it. We will then be able to connect them to pharma, to access programs and so on, or clinical research, clinical trials, or build clinical trials, because the platform really allows that. And a very important piece of this is the clinical support. And so we've gotten both donations of time and technology from clinical support organizations, but we will be referring these individuals obviously to your advocacy organizations. Where there are no advocacy organizations, we'll be helping to build them. I'm one of the co-founders of the International Rare Disease Research Consortium and ran the PAC, which is the Patient Advocacy Constituent Committee. And so I'm working internationally with all the other umbrella groups around the world. We will build this on top of all the stuff I just showed you about Genetic Alliance. We have a lot of partners that have already come aboard, and these are building daily. I can't keep up with putting all the logos together. And our outcomes will essentially be more equitable access to clinical whole genome sequencing. And again, our focus is low to middle income communities, families. And so we'll be in Africa, we'll be in Latin America, we'll be in South Asia. We also will be in the US and putting some stress on the systems here, in the sense, good stress, in the sense of being able to ask the various payers, et cetera, to do more coverage of these kinds of technologies. We already set up a registry for individuals who feel like they need whole genome sequencing, and we're working to triage with other partners who can get access to it. How do we get insurance companies in the US to pay for it? How do we work with Medicaid? As I said, we're working on this bill, and so we're working with Medicaid to do that as well. And we believe this will accelerate the delivery of precision care. Kids will get diagnosed faster, adults will get diagnosed faster, they'll get to care quicker. That 60% change in management is significant and robust. The other thing this will do is create the world's largest, most diverse, because again, we're going to be in communities like Africa, South Asia, places that are not well represented in the reference genome. And it will be patient-owned genomic data associated with EHR in the US. We're already got work going with Amazon and others in other countries where we're looking at how to connect their electronic records or build them, and patient-reported outcomes, rare conditions and common conditions, and so on. So this was made possible by Illumina, again, $120 million donation, sequencing for 5 years. That includes sequencers as well as reagents, Amazon Web Services donating all the storage, and Luna with the people-centered data storage. I'm on the stump for lots of funding. People are surprised because they think Illumina gave me $120 million. They did not. I cannot go to Starbucks with that or pay any staff. And so we're looking at what we need in terms of funding for laboratory overhead, including test interpretation, the clinical services and access to therapies, patient support, including transportation and lodging and so on, in-country capacity building, including training, and then certainly operational support for Genetic Alliance staff to operationalize this whole thing. And I have a couple fundraising slides that won't make any difference to any of you, unless some of you want to contribute $5 or $25. Thank you so much. That is my whirlwind tour of Genetic Alliance.
Wow. So Dr. Korf was correct. You do know everything. Thank you so much. That's so much amazing information. We'll put it out to the group. Does anyone have a question? And don't be shy. Ask questions. It's a lot of information, but I mean, I'm overwhelmed. It's amazing what you've been able to do. I'm looking here in the chat. If you guys are like me, your head is sort of spinning going, I don't know where to
Yeah,
start.
sorry. With
No.
only an hour, I thought I better just give you whet your appetite. You can come back for more. Yeah.
It's just amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing. I'm seeing a lot of thank yous, a lot of wows, excellent information. We have about 15 minutes left. You guys have a captive audience here. If you have questions.
I have a question. This is Kristen, United Porphyrias Association. Of everything that you just went through, I'm just curious, what keeps you up at night, Sharon? What do you worry about?
Well, I work till about 1 a.m. and get up around 5 a.m. So I don't worry at all. I sleep really, really well. What worries me? It depends. It really depends. I mean, sometimes it's a push we're doing on Capitol Hill and I've got to get, certain resources together to do it. Right now, what's keeping me up at night is how am I going to fund the last mile stuff, operations for, leveraging this massive contribution that I just can't leave a bit of on the table. And I'd like to spend it all before the 5-year mark and show them we can do 100,000 genomes a year or 200,000. So right now, that's what keeps me up at night is how to coalesce the communities in such, and communities, I mean, not only you guys, but also the funding communities to see, the powers in the people, the powers in the community. So that's my main concern these days.
So knowing that your fundraising efforts, where do you turn first?
Oh my God. So we've been at this since November 16th. This was announced on my 65th birthday. Illumina announced this. We have a spreadsheet of 100 high net worth individuals. We have a database of 300 companies that have foundations. We're in very serious conversations with Gates right now, CZI, Schwab, on and on and on. I can name. We've reached out to everybody. The good thing was that in my 26 years of working in this world, I barely have asked for money for anything. Genetic Alliance has been a really lean, skinny organization. We don't, for example, ever spend anything on marketing or that sort of stuff. And so now it's time for me to step into the space. I have CEOs on my phone I can text. And so now I'm starting to use the network essentially to say, we need to build support for this. And maybe I'll say one more kind of writ large sort of comment, and that is there's really good networks for funding for pathogens, for infectious disease, obviously for COVID now. There's great supply chains for all of that now. There's not for human genetics and rare diseases. The big funders, Wellcome Trust, NIH, even the Gates Foundation, are really putting a lot of money into the networks that are taking care of major public health issues around the world. And I think it's only becoming up to the top of people's awareness now that genetic disease and especially rare disease burden in the world is going to be overwhelming because other things have been taken care of well. So I think that's another kind of policy piece that I've been trying to work to say, okay, now you big funders need to step up. And, we're really happy groups like CZI have stepped up. And does CZI want to be like, you think of Gates and you think of malaria and you think of water and agriculture and all that in Africa. Do you want the CZI want to be that organization or somebody else? I'm not picking on CZI, but yeah, that's kind of where my head goes.